You're listening to Milwaukee Mafia, your podcast dose of Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Milwaukee Mafia Podcast. I'm Eric.
I'm Gavin.
And Gavin, we're back. What are we looking at today?
Well, before we even get into this, I wanted to make an announcement. It's a sad announcement, and Eric doesn't even know about it.
I have no idea what this is.
Nope, so I'm going to make a sad announcement and break everybody's hearts.
Okay.
I'm taking December off.
Why are you taking December off?
Because I feel like it.
Okay.
So if Eric wants to run repeats for December, he can, but I am taking it off.
He's going on a sabbatical. Interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
So there might be some reruns for those 2 weeks in December, but I will not, but we'll still do Patreon.
Okay.
Because we can't hose those guys. We can't hose those guys. So if you want to pay your $2 to get the 2 Patreon episodes, definitely do that. Because I'm not gonna screw them out of those 2 episodes. But no, I've got another book on contract, and I thought, not that it takes like a long time to put these episodes together, but it does take a little time. And if I can have some extra writing time, I'm going to take some extra writing time.
So are you coming towards the end of the contract in December? Is that the reason for the December time?
No, the end of the contract's actually in March, but just figured, it's a good month to take off because
nobody wants to listen to podcasts anyways because they're all busy getting with Christmassy crap anyway.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you know better than I do, but isn't that like a low numbers month?
To be honest with you, I don't pay that close attention to numbers. So
yeah.
I find it's a podcast.
I did like when we started, and now I haven't looked in forever.
Yeah. I find like as a podcaster, it's best just to ignore that stuff. So
yeah.
I don't know if anybody's ever listening to us or if we're just talking to each other, but I'm good with just talking.
On the rare event I see the numbers are good. So thank you everybody for the good numbers. But yeah, I if it drops 2%. Listeners drop 2% from one episode to the next, I don't care. Like, that's fine.
So, a moment of silence for Gavin's month-long vacation.
Yep.
Okay. Now, on to the subject at hand.
The subject at hand. So, we are back to Frank Balistreri's tax problems.
Ooh,
we're going to pick
part 2 of
part
this.
Part 2. Huh? We're going to pick that up. There was an earlier episode that was his tax problems, 1960 to 1961. This would be 62 to 63. If you want to pause this now, go back and listen to that one, refresh yourself. By all means, do so. I'm going to try to put things in context for this episode, so you shouldn't have to do that, but doesn't hurt.
Cool. I like tax conspiracy. So
yeah, and actually these notes are really short. I expected that this was going to be long, and it's not. So it might be kind of a quick one today.
But you're doing a recap of what happened in the first episode, right? Because I really don't remember either.
Well, I don't really have a recap in front of me. Other than that, this will be an ongoing thing. Like at least as early as 1960, if not earlier, the state and federal tax authorities are looking into Frank for basically falsifying numbers, not paying full taxes on things he should. And some of this, I mean, give him the benefit of the doubt because he is working in largely cash businesses, like restaurants and nightclubs and coin-operated devices and things like that. Not that that's not illegal, because it's still technically illegal, but as anybody who's ever worked as a waiter or waitress knows, you don't actually report that.
There's a lot of abuse there, and it's very easy to abuse, so it just kind of happens natively.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, too, when we're talking, you're thinking about this stuff from the perspective of our era. And I got to imagine back in the 60s, it was even worse because it was probably even easier to do it.
Oh, it probably was.
That's just my guess. I don't know that. I don't have hard evidence of that, but that seems to make sense to me.
I don't know either, but I would agree because now with how much is run through credit and debit cards, the vast majority of purchases probably, the numbers are known.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can't really fudge that.
Right. And the government is not worried about the amount of cash transactions that are getting abused because it's probably so minute because so much of everything that's purchased is done through credit cards. So,
Yeah. So, again, not that it's not illegal, because it is, but if you're fudging your numbers on cash businesses, like, it's like, yes, that is how the mob makes a lot of its money, but like, they're not the only people doing it.
So now you said you don't really have a recap of what happened in the previous episode, but can you at least kick us off with, has he been arrested or anything at this point in time?
No, he's basically just under ongoing investigation,
Okay.
and they've called people in for questioning. He knows that he's being investigated.
Okay.
So they call in Jenny Aliotta in January 1962, who is both his girlfriend and his wife's cousin. So that's fun. And they knew that she was involved somehow. And she testified that, yes, she did occasionally keep some records at her house, some tax records, some financial records at her home to work on for Frank. She specifically said she had Hotel Roosevelt records and the pub records, two businesses which at this point, by the early 60s, were not even active businesses anymore. So maybe she used those examples to be like, they're not current.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Shortly after that, Frank had a hearing to try to prevent the IRS agents from probing his pre-1958 finances. He said, there's statutes of limitations. You should probably not be able to go back and look at that. So he's like, some of the things that would include are both the Hotel Roosevelt and the pub, as well as the Badger State Boxing Club that he used to be a manager for.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, these are pre-statute of limitations. You shouldn't even be able to look at those.
Mm-hmm.
So he tried to stop them. That didn't go so well for him.
I'm curious, can you share why that didn't go so well for him? Because I feel like that's pretty open shut. Like, they can't touch you if it's after 5 years or whatever. I think that's what the statute of limitations on text stuff is.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be more clear on, there's a part that's going to come up where it'll be more clear about that. But basically, they're not going to be able to actually charge him with anything for what they see.
But
they're establishing a pattern of what he's doing.
Gotcha.
Being like, this isn't just something that you've just started doing. You've been purposely doing your papers wrong for a long time. IRS agent Jackson, I don't even know his first name, Agent Jackson, reported to the FBI his findings from examining records of Marvin Topper, who was Frank Balistreri's accountant. Marvin Topper, so far as I know, perfectly legitimate accountant. I don't know anything good or bad about him other than just he's an accountant. The name Mary Oida was signed on documents for the pub going back to 1956. But when Oida was questioned, she said she didn't sign anything, had no interest in the pub, and had never even been in there. Oida was employed at the First Wisconsin National Bank and was another cousin of Frank's wife. She did not know who signed her name and said she never had business dealings with Frank of any kind. Other names on the business records included Ben Barwick, who was the secretary of Badger State Boxing, Bob Bundy, who was the secretary of the Hotel Roosevelt, Joe Maniaci, Joe Dentis, Ed Meisner, who was the father of Milwaukee police detective, John Alexander, Steve DiMaggio, and Rudy Porchetta. So some of those names don't really matter, but just kind of like the people who are involved in like his business dealings here.
And it does sound like a lot of them make sense to me. But like, yeah, the one girl, like, what is her name doing on there? Especially since she claims she didn't even know her name was on there.
Yeah.
It's just a weird thing.
Yeah, it's weird. So the IRS agent talked to her. She denied knowing Peter Balistreri, Frank's brother. She denied knowing Buster Balistreri. She said Joe Dentis she knew because he was married to another cousin who was a sister of Frank's wife. She denied knowing Ed Meisner, John Alexander, or Stephen DiMaggio. She knew nothing of the pub, the Tradewinds, Gallagher's. She offered multiple signature samples to show the names in the documents were not hers. The signatures weren't even didn't even look like her signature. Her name was also on a 1956 check for $150 from the pub that was purchasing bamboo to be installed. And she's like, that doesn't match my name either. So somebody had been signing her name on checks and other documents that she didn't know.
So now, have you seen this in other scenarios with the mafia to give an explanation of why they would put this person's name on there? Is it just to kind of give the company some legitimacy or something?
I don't know what the motivation is here, because this last one in particular, this check to buy bamboo to remodel the place, like, there's no reason to lie about that check. Like, the check is not in question. There's not a fake
You're
check.
legitimately buying bamboo to remodel a place. It's like, why do we need to fraudulently sign a name to this?
So I don't know. I mean, it's very common to have, what they call a front man, to have like somebody whose name is on things.
That looks legitimate.
That looks legitimate.
Right.
But generally speaking, that person knows
that they're the front man.
That they're the front man. They know that they don't really have to do that much, but they're still going to get paid because their name's on things. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why they would involve somebody who had no idea she was involved. Like, at that point, you just make up a name or something. Like, I don't know what the point of this was. There was clearly some thought, but I don't know what it is. All right, so Frank had filed his motion to have the IRS not investigate beyond the 3-year statute of limitations. This motion was rejected because elements of fraud were apparent in his tax returns going back farther. The judge said there was probable cause that Balistreri was filing false and fraudulent returns at least as far back as 1955. Balistreri claimed an income between $5,100 and $9,900 each year, which doesn't sound like very much to begin with, but I mean, keep in mind the inflation on that. But either way, fairly low amounts. Well, at the same time, he swore in banking paperwork that he was making between $15,000 and $16,500 each year in order that he could get loans, better loans. There was like a 2 to 3 times increase on what he was telling the banks he made.
And what he actually made.
Yeah, compared to what he was telling the IRS he made.
Yeah, what he tells the IRS he made.
So was he lying to the bank or the IRS? But either way, the judge is like, well, clearly there's some number in here, some number problems. And I don't want to do this. Like, this is something I absolutely do not want to do on this podcast, but I'm going to do it.
Okay.
This is very much the exact same thing the former president is on trial for as we're recording this.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, this is him telling some people that he's worth such and such and telling other people that he's worth 3 times as much, so that when he's buying and selling real estate and getting loans,
he can get more money.
Yeah. That's in progress. So it's all alleged and whatever. Like, I'm not saying anything one way or the other about that. But that is basically what they're claiming that he's been doing, the former president's been doing for a very long time.
So before you get mad at Frank Balistreri for doing it, just remember, he's not the only one.
It's apparently a thing. A man named Alex Gwizdala appeared before the IRS in response to a subpoena and discussed his dealings with Frank Balistreri. Gwizdala had formerly been an official of the Hotel Roosevelt and was now the manager of a bar and grill at the Royal Hotel. Gwizdala and Oscar Brockman had the lease on the Royal Hotel restaurant in their names. In fact, they might have had the hotel restaurant in the Royal Hotel before they even worked at the Hotel Roosevelt. This might have happened at the same time. It's going to get weird if I go into... Just ignore that. It doesn't matter. The Hotel Roosevelt, the one that they were investigating, had been owned by Phil Valley and Bob Bundy, who was a known frontman for Felix El Doricio. Frank Balistreri was president of the Hotel Roosevelt, and Bundy was secretary-treasurer. Gwizdala joined as vice president around 1947. According to him, he knew these other guys only casually because they were regular visitors of a coffee shop that he had hung out at since 1940. Gwizdala was under the impression that he would manage a restaurant in the hotel, but when that did not materialize a year later, he withdrew his money from the corporation. Regarding the current investigation, the IRS got the impression that he wanted to help, but he was afraid of possible consequences. They asked him to return a few weeks later. How they knew what Gwizdala had said to the IRS is unknown, but Balistreri and Ben Barwick were unhappy with what Gwizdala had apparently said and made the point to see him before he returned to speak to the IRS again. So let me re-say this. So Frank Balistreri was involved in the Hotel Roosevelt.
Mm-hmm.
Along with him were Phil Valley and Bob Bundy, who we know are mob guys.
Right.
For a while, possibly as little as a year, this Alex Gwizdala guy also had a financial stake in it. He does not seem to have any mob connections whatsoever, and his involvement is sort of just like a fluke.
Okay.
But that also now makes him the guy the IRS wants to really drill down on during their investigations, because he's the good guy. You know, like you had worked with these guys for a year, you were financially involved with them, but we know you're not a mob guy, so we want you to tell us everything.
Okay. So you're saying that not when you, I thought when you said like work with them, you meant like this is the guy they're going to go after, but no, they're trying to leverage him to get him to let out the secrets about the other people.
Right.
Basically. Okay.
Right. Which now then has Frank and these other guys kind of scared about what he'll say, because he has no incentive to lie to the IRS. Like, he's a legit businessman.
But you would think he's got to know who he's involved with.
Oh, he definitely knows.
So I mean, there's going to be a little bit of hesitation there.
Absolutely. I mean, it is weird to me, like, why he was involved in the first place, but it seems he's completely legit.
Mm-hmm.
So, Frank had been speaking with Ben Barwick about Gwizdala, and they were concerned that Gwizdala was going to say something to the IRS that would not only hurt them, but also implicate Phil Valley, who had been involved in the Hotel Roosevelt and was a big union guy. Balistreri told Gwizdala to plead the fifth if he was called to testify, but he didn't. Apparently, Gwizdala even said that he hadn't put any money of his own into the Hotel Roosevelt, when they actually had records saying that he clearly had invested $5,000 into it. So Gwizdala is now, he could plead the fifth and just not testify at all. He could tell the truth, which would probably hurt the mob. But he's going like the other way. He's been like, I don't know these guys. I wasn't involved. But there's records saying he was. So he's not helping them or himself now. The IRS interviewed Gwizdala again, and Gwizdala said that Balistreri had not threatened him as far as how to testify. He again denied any financial interest in the Hotel Roosevelt, and he also denied that Phil Valley had any financial interest in his current business in the Royal Hotel, where Gwizdala had the lease. An informant said that Alex Gwizdala had told Ben Barwick the names of the IRS agents who had interrogated him. Barwick and Frank Balistreri met up after and were concerned that things Gwizdala said could implicate Phil Valley in some way. I kind of just said that, but this is an ongoing concern. An informant was present during a lengthy conversation between Frank Balistreri and his attorney, Eugene Koonin. Based on the information provided, I'm fairly confident that the informant here was a hidden microphone.
Okay.
Because the information was pretty thorough. Balistreri told Koonin that he had not seen Gwizdala in 8 or 9 years, and then Gwizdala called him out of the blue when the subpoena came down. Balistreri said that he told Gwizdala to take the fifth, or otherwise, if you're going to talk, tell the truth. Instead, Gwizdala allegedly made up a story that he had no financial involvement in the Hotel Roosevelt and had no stock, when in fact he did. Balistreri and Koonin spoke about the Melody Lane records, it's another business he had, that the IRS was trying to locate. Frank said his brother Pete had picked up the records from an accountant named Jenkins, and Jenkins was told that he didn't have to remember about the records if the IRS asked him anything. Koonin asked how Balistreri would record any payments from Melody Lane, which Balistreri owned but always claimed he didn't to get around jukebox licensing laws. He said he would report it the same as next year, whatever that means. Balistreri said if he was called before the federal grand jury looking into gambling, he would have Dominic Frenzy say that he wasn't available due to an illness. The FBI noted that Balistreri was not expected to be called to the federal grand jury looking into gambling, and that they would pass on the Melody Lane information to the IRS, suitably disguised so that the IRS wouldn't know what the source was. So basically, I'm fairly confident that a microphone was in a room that these guys were meeting in.
Mm-hmm.
And so anything said here is presumed to be honest. And basically, yeah, if I get called to testify, I'm going to be sick. And if they ask about these records, we don't know where these records are. Like, he's not like admitting to murders or anything on here, but it's very clear that the record keeping is not on the up and up here.
Yeah. And it's very clear that they're probably trying to hide something.
Yeah.
know?
In the beginning of this episode, we were talking about Jenny Aliotta, who is the girlfriend as well as the cousin of Frank's wife,
Mm-hmm.
and she kept some of the records in her apartment.
Right.
Well, unbeknownst to her or Frank, the FBI had been renting the apartment across the hall from her.
I think did you mention this before in another
It's probably in the previous
okay.
tax thing. So in June 1962, they removed their equipment from that apartment across the hall. They've decided that whatever they're going to get out of there, they've got out of there, and they're going to pack up and leave. They turn over whatever it is that they found over to investigating authorities, and a search warrant was issued and executed on September 26, 1962, by Ernest Johannes, a special agent of the Intelligence Division of the IRS, along with special agents of the FBI. A big raid on this apartment.
This is Jenny's apartment.
Yes.
Okay.
Which is apartment 406 at 1609 North Prospect Avenue in Milwaukee, if anybody wants to check out this apartment.
Is it still there?
It is very much still there.
Nice.
Yeah. So it was occupied by Jenny Aliotta under her alias of Loretta Fisher. It's a great fake name, Loretta Fisher. The apartment superintendent had actually said, yeah, you guys are good to come in. You don't have to break down any doors or anything. You've shown me the paperwork. Everything looks great. So he lets them in. Actually keeps it kind of low key, which is nice. Because, it doesn't look great when you got a bunch of agents swarming your apartment complex, I would imagine. But anyway, so they got in there, and it didn't actually look like an apartment so much. Like, there wasn't food. There wasn't anything that really implied that anybody was staying there, like on a regular basis. But there were a lot of filing cabinets. So they came in and they scooped up records for the Hotel Roosevelt, the pub, a company called Ben K, the Tower Tavern, Melody Lane, the Bonfire, the Badger State Boxing Club, and even some of Frank's personal tax records. According to the Milwaukee Journal, the IRS seized a, quote, truckload of records from the Aliotta apartment, including several records that the Balistreri brothers had previously testified were destroyed in a fire.
Uh-oh.
The truckload was apparently 4 filing cabinets and 2 boxes of various records for 6 taverns, an amusement device company, a construction company, and a meat market. The U.S. attorney said, "We intend to check the seized records against the testimony that we currently have to determine whether perjury was involved. We also want to determine whether the Balistreris violated federal laws by failing to comply with a summons to turn over these records seized."
I wouldn't they have definitely violated that law because they said the records were destroyed?
They would definitely have.
Yeah. Like that. I don't think that's a question of whether they did, but
yeah, when they say we don't have those records and then the records turn up, I mean,
at Frank Balistreri's girlfriend's house of all places too, like pretty much, I mean, guilt is there.
Yeah. And this actually kind of brings us to the end of this part, and this is quite a twist here.
Okay.
Of course, what you do when this happens, if you're somebody who has really good attorneys, you file motions to try to stop this from happening, right? Which, of course, is what they did.
And by motions, I'm guessing they're trying to say that the records were obtained illegally or something like
Precisely.
that. Something
Precisely. They filed a motion saying that the search warrant was a bad search warrant. They shouldn't have been able to issue it. It took a few months to get through the courts, but then in April 1963, federal judge Kenneth Grubb made the following decision. The warrant issued regarding the property in Jenny Aliotta's apartment was not valid because it lacks sufficiency of designation of the objects of the search and seizure, which, to my understanding, means when they filled out the search warrant, they didn't list everything on there they were specifically looking for.
Okay.
The search and seizure conducted pursuant to the invalid warrant was therefore illegal, and the objects obtained thereby must be returned. So, right here, they've got him.
Yeah,
they've got
nailed him.
These records that you said didn't exist, they exist. We've got several filing cabinets of these records that you couldn't find because they were in someone else's apartment. We now have them, but thanks to the power of good attorneys, the judge says, nope.
You don't have them.
You got to give it back and pretend you never saw any of it.
Wow, so this could have been the end if they would have just listed something on the freaking search warrant.
Yes.
Because I assume as long as you list something on the search warrant, even if you go in and find something that isn't listed on the search warrant, it's still valid, I would think.
Yeah, and I don't know, I haven't seen the search warrant. I don't know what they wrote on there. Like, they knew what they were looking for. So I don't know if they were just like vague about it, if they just wrote like tax records or whatever they wrote. But apparently the judge decided against them. And this is Judge Kenneth Grubb. Like, this isn't like this guy's a friend of the mob. Like, this guy has ruled against them on many occasions. So, like, this is not a corrupt judge. He's just, whatever happened here, they didn't do a very thorough job with the paperwork, I guess. So
yeah, and if you think about it, if this guy is not a friendly judge to the mafia, I mean, more than likely he's fully aware of who Frank Balistreri is and wants to see him go down.
He's 100% aware, yeah.
So they must have really mucked up this paperwork for him to say, you got to give it back. Yeah. Because, otherwise he's going to side way on the side of the law enforcement as opposed to the Frank Balistreri, unless I guess maybe he was threatened or something.
No, I don't think so. But yeah, so I'm going to pause it here because this is like a good pause because now like they had him. Nope. Reversed. And this story is so bizarre because we know they're looking into his tax issues as early as 1960. From looking at things, they know that he's been doing things incorrectly, at least since 55. We're now up to 1963. Frank is now kind of like on the winning side of this fight because the thing that they had against him, they now don't have.
Yeah, they lost it completely.
Yeah, and this is going to go on, like, I don't think I'm giving away, but like this is a pretty well-known thing. Like, he does end up going to prison for tax fraud, but that's not till like 1970. So this ongoing back and forth is going to go on for several more years.
Wow. And we're never going to hear the end of this story because it's going to take us forever to get to 1970.
Yeah. But it's like, if you want to say that he started goofing his taxes in 1955, which probably was sooner than that even, but we'll say 55, and he ends up finally getting convicted in 1970, that's 15 years. They knew he was doing it wrong, but couldn't actually nail him for it. That's pretty good.
And the interesting thing is too, they're trying to nail him for it.
Like
there's probably millions of people that don't do their taxes right. But the government isn't trying to nail them for it. In this guy, they're directly trying to get him, and they just can't.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like, he is probably not the worst offender. I mean, I don't know how many people the IRS look into each year for tax issues, you know. But I'm guessing he is not the worst of the worst. But because he's got that name, there's definitely a large amount of resources going in this direction. Like, they are trying.
Mm-hmm. So now, would you, I guess, are these companies and things that they're looking into for the tax purposes, would you consider that mafia connected? Or are they just targeting this because they know Frank Balistreri owns it and they're just looking for a way to bring him down? You get what I'm saying?
I'm not sure, because I don't know where one ends and the other begins. That's sort of the trick of it.
Because are they attacking things he's mafia-related things he's doing, or are they just attacking his personal businesses because they know he's a part of the mafia to bring him down?
If I understand your question, I mean,
like,
I think they're going after. I don't think they care about the businesses as much as they care about him. So it's the businesses that he owned or was involved in.
Right.
I don't think it started the other way.
Yeah, like, when you look at these businesses, you wouldn't call these mafia-owned businesses. These are Frank Balistreri-owned businesses who happens to be the mob boss for the mafia.
Yes, although, like I said, I'm not really sure what the difference is. Like, it's kind of the same thing.
Okay.
Because, like, yeah, they are his businesses, but because they are his businesses,
they're kind of controlled and run by the mafia.
Like, the people he's going to hire to work there are going to be his mob buddies, and they're running the money through them in a questionable way. And that's, like I said early on, like, if you've worked in restaurants and stuff, or bars, or any, you know, cash heavy business, like, what he's doing is not unusual.
Mm-hmm.
But that is part of the reason that you see so many people in the mafia own bars, restaurants, nightclubs, because they're cash heavy businesses. Like, you know, like, everything that goes through them does not have to be taken into account. It should, but it obviously doesn't.
Right.
So yeah, like, that's not unusual that there's a big overlap between those types of businesses and the mob. But at the same time, the vast majority of those businesses that are probably having similar business practices are not mob businesses.
Right.
I don't know. It's tough. It's weird. Over the years of doing this, you know, and I've been doing this, I don't know how long now, 12 years? Maybe longer? I don't even remember.
Probably longer.
Yeah.
When did the original Milwaukee Mafia book come out?
The original Milwaukee Mafia book came out in 2012. So that's 11 years plus however long it took to put that together. So, yeah.
Plus, you were probably dabbling in this long before that as well.
Yeah,
so.
But it's like, it is weird, like, how I've come around. Like, my point of view has changed so much in the last 10 years from being like, oh, the mob, bad guys, bust the bad guys, you know? I mean, it wasn't that simple, but it's kind of that angle. And now, like, I still feel that way to a point, because it's not cool to go out and, like, hijack people and, like, murder. Like, that's not cool. But a lot of the stuff that they actually end up getting in a lot of trouble for isn't that bad. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's tax fraud, it's gambling, it's things like that. And it's no worse than what a lot of other people do.
Right.
So, like, the things that they actually end up getting prison time for is, like, the stupidest things. And they get in trouble not necessarily because they're the worst offenders, but because they have names and they can't get in trouble for the things that they should be getting in trouble for.
Kind of like, you look at it from the perspective of Frank Balistreri went to prison for tax fraud. Mm-hmm. But yet, at some point in time, he probably ordered somebody to be killed.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
And never got anything for that, which just seems really counterintuitive.
Yeah, you pretty much, if you're in the mob and you killed a guy or you ordered a guy killed, you're not going to prison for it. Mm-hmm. It's just not going to happen. They almost never solve mob murders. So you got to get them for the other stuff. But it's funny because, like, on an individual basis, like, if you ignore what the name of the person on trial is, it's not necessarily what they're doing is the most terrible thing in the world.
And that's kind of a shame because when so I'll be on, I've gone on this long binge of watching this TV show called American Greed. Have you ever heard of this?
I've heard of it, but I've not seen it.
It's like they just cover a different like Ponzi scheme or some sort of scam that was run in the United States in each episode.
Yeah.
But it shocks me when they talk about the sentences these people get. Because these people are stealing millions and millions and millions of dollars from people and they get like 6 years of prison time.
Yeah.
So it's a shame. I don't know. You've probably said how long Frank Balistreri actually went to prison.
It's not long. It's 2 years or less.
Yeah. So like they're going after him for these complex things that you really, for some reason, don't get any prison time for, which is a shame to me for one thing.
Yeah.
And two, it just seems like a very inefficient way to do it. Go solve the murders because you can then throw them in jail for a very long time.
Right. Oh, and these are two different things. I mean, like what Frank was doing and like what most of the mob guys do, they're fudging the numbers and they're hurting the IRS. And you can make a case. You can be like, well, that's money that should go to taxes and the taxes fund schools. And you could, if you want to, you could try to make these big, lofty arguments. But basically nobody's getting hurt by what these guys are doing. Now, what you're talking about with the Ponzi schemes,
people are getting hurt.
That's legit. I mean, if you've got $1 million to invest in something, like, I don't typically feel that bad for you, but I've heard enough stories where people don't have money to burn, and then they think like, oh, this is a good use of my life savings, and they're screwed.
Yep, they put the only $10,000 they have on, into something. And then this guy's over there buying yachts and crap like that while this person is losing, has just given up everything they had for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
And it's a shame. And you're very right on that. But I'm going to go on a limb and say that the mafia did some pretty twisted stuff that probably screwed individuals over just as bad.
They totally do. But it's just, for the purpose of this episode, I mean, what he's doing here, as far as they can tell, is fudging the numbers on a few $1,000s, on some businesses. And again, just for inflation, it's more than a few $1,000s today, but it's a relatively piddly amount because by the time they finally get him, they probably spent more investigating him than they actually got him for. So it's...
But at least they got him off the street for 2 years, right?
Yeah. So it is weird. Like the more that I start like looking at things and not being like, oh, we got to bust the mob guys, and just looking at these things like instance by instance and being like, was this really the best use of resources? Like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's not the worst part of the resources because back to the gambling guy that we did the episode on, and they followed him around for years and found absolutely nothing. So, but all right. Well, do you got anything else to add? How long are we looking? Because now do we jump? When will the next segment of this part come up? Is it going to be?
Well, it'll probably do 64, 65 next. And so
it's probably going to be just the same amount of time, right?
Probably be a while again.
Yeah. So.
But yeah, we're firmly in 63 now. We'll probably be in 64 soon. I think the pace might start picking up a little bit now because most of the episodes aren't like 1 year or 1 month. Like I'm trying to cover like broader ranges. Mm-hmm. So the timeline isn't perfect, but yeah, we should be moving ahead at this point.
Very cool. All right, then with that, we'll wrap this episode up. Again, we thank everybody for tuning in. We do have a Patreon. You can check that out at patreon.com/Milwaukee Mafia, or you can go to MilwaukeeMafia.com and find that. And Gavin, where can people contact you?
They can email MilwaukeeMafia@gmail.com. I do get emails. I got a very nice email just this past weekend. So
very cool.
Yeah, from an employee of a publisher I used to work with. I no longer work with them. I still get royalty checks, which is nice, but I no longer work with them. And it was really nice. They reached out and said that they could tell that we were doing really well and the things had taken off. And I was Cool. That was really
Very
nice
cool.
of you to reach out.
And it's very cool that did they find the podcast? Is that what the email was referencing?
I don't think it was the podcast specifically, but they had found the website, they were pretty happy with what they saw.
Oh, very cool. All right, and then with that, we'll be back next week with a Patreon episode in 2 weeks with a regular Mafia episode. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in to the Milwaukee Mafia podcast. Join us next time for another look back at Wisconsin Mafia and true crime history.